How far is she? Okay. Yeah, what it is, guys, is that I'm actually going to be having these trainings every Wednesday for quite some time, because I'd rather get 20 of you together and have that one conversation rather than be bombarded one by one. So every Wednesday, because what it is that it's a 5-part series. The buyer's perspective, the seller's perspective, the law itself, how we're going to be impacted on a daily basis. So it's very important that you wrap yourself around what's getting ready to happen, so that way you can deal with objections and the commission cutting, or folks thinking that we're gonna work for free, right? But you'll be okay. Are you nervous? No, it's just gonna be okay. ¿Qué pasó, Benjamín? ¿Cómo andamos? Are we ready? How about we start and then she'll. Uh-huh. Alrighty, guys. So let's get this.
Welcome to Oxford's Tuesday, number 159, Commission Lawsuits. Real estate commissions have come under scrutiny from the Department of Justice and the lawsuits, the most recent being the Sitzer-Burnett. And the verdict in favor of the plaintiffs created many questions, so we want to provide you with a plan to move forward. And to be assured that we addressed it completely, we're going to present this in 5 parts, each addressing a specific topic. So the beginning is going to give you an overview, and then the last sections are going to answer the question, what are we going to do about it? And that is the important part. And it may not be our most entertaining series of videos, but it will be a very important one. And at the end, you will have the skills, confidence, and a competitive advantage over other agents. And although the content is United States specific, the lessons and spirit of it may help all agents in any country. Further, each state and province will have different rules and regulations pertaining to the compensation and disclosures. And your clients are going to read about these lawsuits. They're going to ask questions, so you need to be ready to address them when you're around their kitchen table. I've been talking to my friends about them, and so far, they haven't heard anything about it. So it's not quite public at the time of this shooting. But once you sit down and they start researching, they're going to be having questions. And by the way, we're not going to give legal advice, but we'll suggest prudent practices for dealing with compensation discussions with your clients, whether they're buyers or sellers. And then you all have to follow this up with your company, legal counsel, your broker, and then address specific terms in your buyer-agent agreements. Now, this is an opportunity to innovate and be more valuable than your competitors. So you've got to be competent in presenting the value of your services to buyers. That's going to be a big issue that comes out of this series of videos. It's a complex issue, and it's going to drive part-timers and hobbyists out of the business, which is good for you and for your consumers. So the objectives of this video are to explain to sellers the commission lawsuit litigation, to educate your sellers to the options and negotiability of agent compensation, articulate the benefits of representation and your value proposition to buyers, and finally, to address the key elements of a buyer-broker agreement. I'd also like to thank our contributors. And you can see your outline for detailed information on each of them. But Marcy Rogo's been in the business since '71. She's the vice chair of the Professional Development Committee and the Professional Standards. Rob Levy, he's been a licensed realtor in Portland, Oregon since 1988, and he appears on a lot of our videos. Jack Miller, the president and CEO of T360, he presented a couple of videos for us already, and I'll tell you about those. John McGilvery for helping me with the buyer diagram. I'd also like to thank Steve Murray for doing a previous video that perfectly relates to this one. We also have some great support materials to you. Obviously, the KFT 159 outline, which has everything I'm talking about in detail, a transcription of all the video interviews that we did. I've got a document that you can use with your sellers that explains the lawsuits. It'll be in Microsoft Word so you can edit it. I have another one that's going to be for your buyers, and another document that is the benefits to buyers of representation. These are great documents for you to use. So let's go through the 3 claims of the Sitzer-Burnett lawsuit. The first one related to NAR's Clear Cooperation Policy, CCP, which requires that listings be in the MLS within 24 hours. But the requirement to disclose compensation carried the implication that without an offer of compensation, their home wouldn't be shown, which they felt was coercive and that it was an antitrust mechanism for the consumer market. And they also claimed that this system put pressure on sellers to offer high commissions to attract buyers' brokers. Number two, lacked the seller benefit. The sellers felt that they were forced to pay for services that didn't benefit them, and further, paying for an agent to work against their interest. And number three was commission negotiability. The sellers claimed that they were unaware that buyer-agent commission was negotiable. Here's Marcy Rogo's take on the CCP.
The Clear Cooperation Policy came into effect in 2019, which meant that every time you got a listing and you started to market it to the public, you needed to have that into the MLS within 1 business day. But the point was, if you were going to advertise it to the public, we've always had exclusive listings. We've always had an opportunity where if a seller doesn't want their home in the MLS, they can keep it off the MLS. In a large brokerage company, for example, they can tell each other all about the new listings that they've got coming up. They can do all of that. Now, what the lawsuit is saying is the Clear Cooperation has something to do with compensation. And that's not the case at all. Because you put a property in the MLS, it's always had a compensation field. Always. Clear Cooperation didn't change any of that. And every single individual MLS has different compensation fields. Every broker gets to decide, along with the seller, what they want those fields to have in them. And recently, NAR said a 0 is just fine, or it can be a number. It can be anything that the broker and the seller have agreed to. That's all. It's the way it's always been. It didn't change. So I'm not clear why they think that the compensation because of the CCP had anything to do with this lawsuit is very unclear to me, because you still put the compensation in the field just like you did before.
So as you heard Marcy say, not a lot has changed about that. So I hope this gives you a good overview of the litigation. Now the videos that follow will answer the question, now what? In the next video, we'll examine the effects of the lawsuits to include suggested practices, the unintended consequences, and then we're going to challenge some of the claims that were made.
There is a MLS up north that is challenging the compensation being disclosed. Supposedly, after July 1st, you can't disclose it anymore, but it's already being challenged because it doesn't make any sense. Because can you imagine having a, how many calls, how many texts you're going to get, right? Right? It's just really silly, is what I think. If the seller has already agreed that, okay, I want to sell my home, I need to be in New York or in Washington or wherever in 3 months, I want to offer 3% plus a bonus. They have the right for that to be on the market as such. Okay, I'm paying you and I'm paying you well. Bring me a buyer, right? So once again, just because the lawsuit said that the compensation can no longer be public knowledge on MLS, we're going to see certain things evolve. Okay, so once again, when this was done, and this guy went far and beyond to research a lot of things, and trying to make it, layman terms, I guess. But it's not that complicated. The rules will change. We'll know a little bit more how the state of Texas wants us to handle it. And contracts will change, buyers reps will change. Okay, so there's a lot of forms that probably within the next couple of weeks will change because we're almost there. Okay, Clint.
Welcome to Knox First Tuesday, number 159, Part 2, Commission Lawsuits Effect, the second part of our 5-part series. In this section, we're going to examine the effects of the lawsuit to include suggested practices, the unintended consequences, and then challenge some of the claims that were made. But first, suggested practices. Number 1, we cannot tell a buyer that the commission is free. Number 2, agents may not select homes based on compensation. Now, the MLSs have changed their format, so you can't search by it anyway. Number 3, clearly state to clients that their commissions are negotiable, which means it's between the brokerage and the client. Big part of this lawsuit. You need to state that. By the way, a lot of the texts that are on these slides are all going to be in your outline, so don't worry about it. Number 4, you must disclose to the sellers that the offering of buyer agent commissions compensation is optional. So if a seller says, you mean I don't have to pay? The literal answer is, no, you don't. We're going to talk more about that later. Number 5, you must have full transparency in the commission compensation. Who's getting paid, how they're getting paid, how much is it? Make your fees explicit. Don't hide them. And number 6, although the buyer brokerage agreements are not required in all states, it is a professional practice that I suggest to you to have a written agreement that covers rights, responsibilities, and compensation with every buyer. Very critical part is a follow-up on this. Next, the question I ask is, should they be represented or beware? Before buyer agency, all agents were the sub-agents to the seller. So for those of you who haven't been in the business for a while, don't know that. So we started life, we had a seller. They would hire a listing agent, and the listing agent represented the seller. Now, buyers come along, and they meet an agent one way or another, open houses, ads, you name it. And now they have what we would call, I'm not going to put the B there, we're just going to call it an agent because they're not a buyer agent. That's my point. So buyers thought that they were being represented. They thought, hey, I've got an agent, when in fact this agent actually also represented the seller. So both agents represented the sellers. The buyers had no representation at all. This is a critical part. This is why we have buyer agency. So let's continue through this. Next, buyers thought they were being represented. The majority of buyers thought, hey, I'm being represented. They were not. And then agents made a huge mistake. They go, well, my buyers. Well, these are my buyers, indicating a client relationship. No client relationship. So the FTC led the change in practice from sub-agency to what we have now, buyer agency. And having listing and buyer agents was a pro-consumer means of providing representation to both parties. It was a good thing. Here's what Mercy has to say about the FTC.
We did it because the Federal Trade Commission in 1983 said buyers need representation. That's how the whole thing started. And the buyers didn't know they weren't represented, and they needed to be represented. And now we've got the Federal Trade Commission and all these people saying, oops, we might have made a mistake there.
Yes, Marcy, they need to be represented. Now let's take a look at some unintended consequences. Number 1, this whole thing might limit buyers' access to agent representation if their fee isn't covered. That's not good. Number 2, after down payment and closing costs and all the other funds that they have to come up with, they may not be able to pay for representation, and that would return to buyer beware instead of buyer be represented. That would not be a good thing. Here's what Rob Levy has to say about especially first-time buyers.
So one of the issues that I see, David, is really dealing with first-time home buyers, which allegedly all these lawsuits are out there to protect, and they're hurting them. And by that I mean, if you look at like a starter home in a Midwest market or something where it's $200,000, and I'm going to buy my first house on an FHA loan for 3.5% down, that's what, $7,000. Let's throw in a couple $100,000 for all the other closing costs, and I happen to have $10,000 in the bank, and I'm spending $9,000 on all my closing costs, but now I've got to pay my realtor. The banks at this point are not willing to finance that. So how is that person going to pay me as a buyer's agent?
Next, I would like to address some of the media that we just complain about all the time, and there's plenty of them out there, but I'm going to pick on this one. December 3rd, 2023, CNN came out with why real estate commissions are X% and why that's about to change. And there was actually a number there, but I'm afraid to put any numbers. They challenged the current commission sharing policy, and they praised decoupling selling and buyer side commission. And here's what the article said. Pay attention to this. They said, if the commission structure shifts to separating commissions, it could mean a big savings for the homeowners because they'd only have to pay for their own agent. And then they go on and contradict their own claim. And they said, but it could make buying a home even more expensive because buyers would either have to pay out of pocket for representation or go without a broker if they didn't negotiate the payment. So in their own article that was anti-real estate, they come back and say, this is not a good thing. Unbelievable to me. And by the way, I recommend that you get the link to the article. It's in your outline. You can go through the whole thing and dispute some of this. Next, the media goes nuts over Australia. Oh, Dan, and the commissions down in Australia is so much less than America. Yeah, we ought to be more like Australia. Oh yeah? Well, let me take you through a couple of things here. I have done 24 presentations in Australia. I know Rick Rushton, one of the top trainers who you've seen in our videos. And I call him up and say, all right, Rick, what's the deal, mate? And this is some stuff you need to know. Number one, commissions are for the seller side only. It is not split with the buyer agent. So the seller's paying half. And I'm not going to use numbers, but it's very close to what we might pay in the US. Now, next, there is limited buyer representation. They don't have it. In the majority of cases, buyers have no representation, but they could hire and pay a buyer advocate, a professional person, to represent their interests. And that costs about 2 to 3% of the sale price. Do you see where we're going here? And number three, the media completely missed this. VPA, vendor paid advertising, to cover marketing, advertising. The sellers pay this in cash up front. Here in the US, we cover that. In Australia, the seller pays for the whole thing, and it can range between 6 to 10 grand. It can go up to $20,000 in some of the metro markets. And by the time you add up the VPA, you've got another 1% added here. Again, then you see where we're going. Number four, the vendor also, the seller has to pay for staging, which is $6,000 to $8,000. And here's another interesting thing. The GST, the goods and service tax, is 10% on top of the commission. So if a seller did have a 2% commission, for example, 10% on top would make it a 2.2%, so it grosses up a little bit. And by the way, 15% of sales in Australia are auctioned. So let's take a look at a quick chart. So here's the value of the home. The seller is going to pay the seller side commission. And then, by the way, they get nicked with GST, so that goes up by 10%. Then they have VPA, vendor paid advertising, and then they pay for staging. So when you add all this up, it's probably more than what people would say our seller side is. And then you add to that what the buyer pays in the typical split between, the seller commission, the buyer commission, you are right back to where we are in the United States. So in my opinion, the system is working. Offering compensation to co-op brokers has worked for decades. But the problem of transparency, buyers believing that the commission was free, the possibility of agents selecting properties to show based on offering a commission, those are some valid points that we need to address. So the question is, how do we preserve the benefits of the two-agent practice without repeating the mistakes that created the litigation? So now you have an overview of the claims in the lawsuit and the possible unintended consequences. In the next video, we're going to address seller best practices.
Can you play section 3 for me as well? And then I'll have a discussion because it's just pretty much what that was about the law.
Best practices. This is the third in the series of our 5-part commission lawsuits video. In this video, you're going to learn how to educate your sellers to the ramifications of the lawsuits, their options of buyer compensation, and the benefits of co-op agent participation. As more of your sellers become aware of the commission lawsuits in the news, they're going to ask you questions, and you need to have your explanation ready. And as a philosophy of how to present this, I refer to Robert Cialdini, who wrote in his book, Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion, that says to divulge weakness early to demonstrate your credibility. An example of this might be a server at a restaurant say, tonight I'd like to tell you about our specials. I'd like you to know that our fish is not the freshest tonight, so I don't recommend you have the fish, but our beef is really good. So by describing what is good and what isn't, you're more likely to trust the server because they told you what wasn't working. How would you apply this to a listing presentation? What that means is you bring up the commission lawsuits before they do. And a good way to start might be, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, as we get into the compensation part of my presentation, I'd like to ask you, have you heard anything in the news about commission lawsuits against the real estate industry? And if they say yes, I would follow up and say, what have you heard? And maybe jot down what they heard and see how much of it accurate and how much of it is not accurate, and then you proceed. And if they haven't heard about it, then it's up to you to bring them up to speed and tell them the truth about what happened and what you're going to do about it. Here are the key points to present. Number one, and again, I've talked about these in the previous two videos, so this is not for you, this is for what you say to a seller. So you sit down with the seller and say, by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, buyers believe that the commission was free, when in fact you, the sellers, have paid for it and was included in the price. So we cannot say to a buyer, it's free. You, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and others resisted paying the buyer compensation to someone that they believed was working against their interests. I'm going to address this in a minute. I don't think they were, but I understand that. They also said that showings were based on an offer of compensation. And number four, clients were unaware of the negotiability of commissions. So I will tell you now in response to this, commissions are negotiable between you and me. So next, we explain the split to the sellers. Say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, over the last decades, what happens is sellers would hire a real estate agent and they would pay a commission. And that commission was typically shared between the listing agent and the buyer agent. So you paid this full amount and we use this for our marketing, etc. And this part was paid out to the buyer agent over on this side. And that's been going on for years and it's worked fine. But as a result of the lawsuits have said that you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, do not have to offer compensation to the buyer agent. You don't have to do that. I would suggest to you, and I'll go further, that I think it's a good idea. So on one hand, this is what you pay to me and my company, the listing agent, listing broker, for all the marketing, everything we do. You can choose, do you want to offer compensation to the buyer agent? That choice is yours. The choice can be zero. You can do selling. You can do whatever you want. But I'm going to take you through some key points that might help you make that decision. So now you take your sellers through a presentation of fee negotiation. And here are some key points. Number one, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, real estate agents provide valuable services to clients, both buyers and sellers. Real estate agents deserve to be paid for those services. The commission rates are negotiable between the agent and seller. So you and I negotiate the fees. They're not fixed by any outside third parties in spite of what the lawsuits may have claimed. But here's the key point, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. The fact that commissions are negotiable doesn't deprive any brokerage of having a specific fee schedule, and it does not require a reduction from our fee schedule. So remember, competence is not collusion. And by the way, that last line, that's between you and me. I wouldn't use that with the seller. But I say to all of you, just because you're competent in maintaining your fee doesn't mean you're colluding. That is a very important point. And here's what Marcy Rogo has to say about that.
People don't believe that they're negotiable fees because people are pretty firm in their fees. Let me just say this. Many good agents and brokerages know exactly how much it costs to run their business. If they have marketing to do, etc., they know how much it costs to run their business. And so they may have a fee that they are going to charge. So I think one of the things that people are going to have to practice is how to explain their services and create their value. That's how they can talk about their commissions and validate them. Now, the only other way around that is to provide a menu of services. And as you well know, there's some services that are called minimum service brokerage companies, or even a full service brokerage company can provide different levels of service. And that's where the negotiation comes in.
Now let's talk about the seller offer of compensation. Offering of buyer agent compensation is optional. We've made that point to the seller. Next, we need to define benefits of offering buyer compensation in a manner that is not threatening or coercive. I'm going to pause, let that sink in. We can offer the benefits of buyer compensation, But we cannot do the corollary or the opposite. We say, and if you don't, you're going to have labor problems. That's what got us into trouble before. So you can say, here are the key points on offering buyer compensation. Number one, the majority of buyers were not from the listing agent. When I was talking to Marcy, we talked about 80% of the transactions are from co-op agents. And my assignment to all of you, seriously, I want you to find out what percentage of your companies, what percentage of your association listings were sold by a co-op broker, not the listing agent. You need to have these numbers. And then you can say to a seller, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we have X thousand agents in the MLS that are ready, willing, and able to sell your home to a buyer they represent. And the more buyers that are available, the faster your home will sell, and likely for a higher price. Number two, buyer agent compensation. Offering buyer agent compensation rewards this group of agents for the work they do to generate buyers. So draft a purchase agreement, then manage the process through to successful closing.
I had a client, I went to list a house, and the client said, hey, I just saw on the news that we don't have to pay a buyer's agent anymore. And my response was, well, if you've got so much confidence in me that you think that I can sell your house without working with any other 14,000 realtors in my marketplace, then yeah, you don't. But in reality, isn't my job to present your house to all of these other 14,000 other realtors in the marketplace and help them help us sell your house for as much money as we possibly can? And it's like, yeah. The second part of it is how I present this in the first place. And really, when I go in on a listing presentation, and I'm not going to use commission percentages because we're not allowed to do that, I'm going to give part of it to the buyer's agent. So let's get that out of the door, right out of the gate. I want to make sure that that buyer who's showing, that buyer's agent who's showing a whole bunch of houses to people from moving in from Dallas, Texas, or wherever, that are interested in your house, they're going to make a living, because that's how they make their living. So let's get that off the table. The other part is what I do. And I charge X, and here's how mine is split. I might charge you X, and it sounds like a lot of money, but I'm spending a third of that on marketing your house. I'm spending a third of that on paying taxes, and a third of it is profit. That's what I do this for.
I love the way Rob acknowledges that we are in this business to make a profit. That's okay. Point three, buyers need funds, as he said. So buyers in lower price ranges need funds for down payment and closing costs, so they may be unable to pay for buyer representation. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the offering of compensation allows them the financial ability to more easily purchase a home. And point number four, this is really important selling skills. You ask your sellers about their purchase experience. And you may begin to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, was your compensation paid for by the seller when you bought this home? And the answer is going to be what? 99% of the cases, yes. Second question, would you have been able to afford a buyer agent commission when you bought this house? We'll probably say, oh, well, gosh, no way. Most of them would say that. And then the key question, what would you have done had there not been an offer of compensation to your buyer agent? What would you have done? And let that question sit there. And you might say, well, we don't know. Well, if you were doing it now, what would you do? Well, we might ask the seller to pay for it. Maybe we wouldn't look at properties that didn't offer it. Their answers really support your point that offering buyer compensation is a good thing to do. Number five, say to the sellers, buyers might ask you to pay the commission anyway. Now, they can't specifically say pay the buyer agent commission, but they could ask for a concession. So seller concessions make the transaction more affordable for a buyer. It makes it attractive to more buyers and increases the likelihood of more offers. And if the home appraises, the buyers can finance their costs. And of course, loan caps have to be raised to allow for that. And by the way, the whole concept of mortgage financing and whether it's included or not is in flux right now. So I don't even want to address it. I'm going to suggest that you learn that as these rules change. And number six, you can still share with the co-op agent. We could still go back to the old way that I showed in a previous chart. You could say, you know, Mr. Seller, in the old way, you know, we charge this commission and we split it two ways. This was my part, the listing agent for all the marketing, photography, all the things we do. And then we take the buyer agent and I choose to pay it. You could just say, this is how I do business. I just choose to do that. It is negotiable, it is option in that the seller could say, no, I don't want you to do that. And you could say, in that case, I may not be the best agent for you because I know the highest likelihood of selling your property is to be this group of agents and I'd like to reward them. If you're uncomfortable with that, I get it, maybe we don't work together. And they might say, well, gosh, if you're going to keep the whole commission, we might as well offer it. Yeah, that's the point. So please understand, it's negotiable between you and the seller. You can still state your policy. You can still charge the fee that you have been charging and just tell the sellers that you're going to keep the whole thing because you're going to be handling both parts. Here's what Marcy Rogo has to say about this issue.
I think there is a real problem in interpretation, and I've been saying this forever. The form should not say the seller pays. The form should say the brokerage company pays, the listing brokerage company pays. And I've encouraged every board that I'm working with to change the language in their contracts. So the listing broker is the one who negotiates commission with the seller. But it's the listing brokerage that is paying the compensation through the MLS, not the seller. So if people would start using that terminology instead of the seller's paying, the seller's not paying you, the buyer's agent. The listing broker is paying the buyer's agent. The listing broker shall disclose to the seller when listing the property exactly who they're paying and how they're paying. My conversation always talks about what the fee that I'm going to charge for my services are, and that I have people who help me providing services and getting the home sold. And one of those people that helps provide services is a cooperating broker. So the listing broker will say, this is the total commission that our company is charging based upon the services that we provide. We cooperate with other brokerages. We cooperate with other entities. And we always believe in compensating people who bring value to our transaction. And that would be the cooperating broker. But the full commission is paid to the listing brokerage, and the listing brokerage pays the cooperating broker.
So as Marcy says, the sellers pay the brokerage. Then as the brokerage, you are free to suggest how you invest it. And you can just say to a homeowner, by the way, we believe that compensating the buyer's agent is a benefit to you. And our split is X. Is that okay with you? It's just the assumptive close. And if they say yes, you don't need to talk about this anymore. If they say no, we're back to some negotiation, and you go through all those points. So Marcy addresses now the in-house agent conversation.
The biggest problem we have in all this discussion is that y'all are forgetting that some of the buyer's agents are within the brokerage's company, the listing brokerage's company. The fee that they're paying to the brokerage includes their own agents inside their company. So the seller is offering compensation to a buyer's agent. Now, if they're saying, I don't want to pay compensation to a cooperating broker outside of your brokerage, then you're back to pocket listings and exclusive listings. So it's not in the seller's best interest to exclude cooperating brokerages, but lots of them do and lots of them have in the past. And that's a decision they have to make. And when it comes to those decisions, they'll just need to understand if they're not willing to cooperate with cooperating brokers in any capacity, then they're hiring the listing company to sell their house, and that's their expectation.
So we have given you some really good information on interacting with the sellers and with integrity, encouraging them to pay a buyer agent compensation so they get the full benefit of your participation, in-house agents, and the co-op agents. In the next video, we're going to focus on your buyers. We'll talk about the benefits of representation, and we'll talk about compensation options, and we'll talk about the value that you bring to buyers in a transaction.
Anybody have a question? Good video, right?
Isn't that just how our buyer, the listing agreements are right now?
Correct. And what ends up happening, the reason that we have this problem is because you had folks saying that the commission was free. I saw it recently, like in the last 2 months. Oh, you don't have to pay me, the commission is free. And at that point, you're involved in deceptive trade practices because it's not free, right?
The listing broker is sharing his commission with.
Correct. That is the right way to say it. Okay. Yes. So, Clint, do you want to play part 4 real quick because it's specific to buyers?
Welcome to Knox First Tuesday, number 159, Part 4, Commission Lawsuits Present Your Value to Buyers. In this video, we will help you develop your buyer value presentation. To help you do this, I would ask, given an equal fee for representing a seller or a buyer, which would you choose? At the NAR convention, I asked my audience, given the same fee, who would you rather represent? And everybody said, oh, much rather the seller. And I said, why would you not choose a buyer? And they came up with all the reasons why. So here's my assignment to all of you. Ask yourself the question, given an equal fee, who would I rather not represent? Then the answer is probably going to be, oh, buyers. They're more difficult, there's more time required, there's interpersonal skills. And if you come up with this whole list of why working with buyers is more difficult, you now have the beginning of a buyer value presentation. So try that, do it in a group, and come up with a complete list. And by the way, here's what Rob Levy has to say about this topic.
What we need to do is we do a super good job on listing presentations because that's what we've been trained all these years as agents. But nobody really does a very good job on buyer presentations. And that's what we really need to do, is hone our skills of selling to buyers what exactly it is that we do for them. They think it's easy. We drive around in a fancy car, we show them 6 houses, they buy one, and that's it. And of course, we all know that it's way more than that. And we need to explain the way more than that, and all of those steps and all of those little bombs that could blow up anywhere along the way, and the skill sets that we have to prevent that from happening, and negotiating counteroffers, negotiating repairs. You guys know what I'm talking about. There's a ton of stuff that we do, but we don't tell anybody what we do. And that, I think, is what we need to focus on.
I love Rob's line. We need to explain the way more than that. That could be a good title of a buyer brochure. Here's a beginning on a way you might help develop this presentation after asking why you would prefer not to work with a buyer. NAR has a document called 179 Ways Agents Add Value to Sellers. Now, it's primarily for sellers, so you should download that for your listing presentation. But I think you're going to find a lot in this document that will also trigger things that you do for buyers. Real Trends did a survey of what buyers value, and there's quite a few of them. Here are the 3 that they pointed out. What buyers want from you: negotiating the right price, whether they be buying or selling. Number 2, they want you to provide a list of homes that are like the ones that they own and that they want to buy. They want the agents to do the sifting. So everybody says, oh, you can point and click and find properties online. After a while, they get sick and tired of it. They want somebody to take a look at all these homes and sift them down to these are the ones that would probably meet your needs. And number 3, they want a trusting relationship with their agents. So sell the relationship with you, not the market. And if you want help with that, we have a video called 8 Steps to Buying a Home. It started life on DVD, and then we put it into a brand new online suite. We have pricing your home to sell, etc. Then I'm going to play for you a clip out of this video that you can send to your buyers. Here's the clip. Although many buyers begin their home search online, they ultimately learn that agents are a valuable resource. They help you find homes before they come to market, teach you about market values, narrow down the search to the most appealing homes, negotiate and structure the purchase, and navigate the process to the final closing. Remember, finding the home isn't the most difficult part. It's negotiating to secure the home and managing the process to ensure a successful closing. Now what I'd like to do is take you through a list of key points that you could make in your buyer value proposition. And I know reading PowerPoint slides to you is annoying, so I'm just going to draw attention to them. In your outline, you'll find all this text, but you can talk about your industry designations, explain those. They don't know what they mean. You need to explain that. Talk about the fiduciary relationship where you're representing their interests. That's a function of your company and your state, but it's an important part of the buyer value proposition. And then so many people will say, well, why should I pay a buyer agent? All you do is, you walk in the door of the home and that's it. Why should I pay you for that? We can find a home online. Well, it's true they can search, but as Steve Murray said, it's a lot of properties on the market, and sometimes they want you to just pick the ones to find and then do the showing. And when they say, well, why should I pay you so much money for showing the home? You say, well, okay, for $150, I'll show you a home. But if you want to buy it, here's what we do. We negotiate. We do the financing and the title and the appraisal and the inspection and funding and closing and then move in. There's a whole lot of stuff that happens, and it could be 30 days, it could be 60 or whatever. This is what you pay me to do. So when people say, well, all I have to do is point and click and find one online, yeah, I suppose you can do that. It doesn't have the subjectivity unless you really know the area. And but from this point forward, that's where we earn our commission. So please, you need to make that point with your buyers. Next, understanding the housing requirements. Anybody could go online if they have a medical issue and they could do a search on a drug and come up with 5 or 6 drugs. Well, which one should I do? And this is where you present the value of relationships, that I sit, I listen to you, I understand your needs, I establish a list of preferences. And if I can be clear on the feeling that you want in your home, then I can go to the market and find not only the objective requirements, but the subjective requirements. Assisting with financing. Yes, they're going to go to a lender and have that done, but still, you can teach them the 4 things: cash, income, debt, and credit. You can provide the options that they have to go through. You can connect them with a lender. That's a big part of what you all do. Educating them to the requirements to purchase a home, an overview of the process, go through that timeline that I just did. And as again, Steve Murray of Real Trends is where we got a lot of this information. It's in KFT 130-1. But here's what Steve had to say about his research.
Buying or selling a home is infrequent. It's not something they do every day, so they don't really know the process. Number 2, they know it's complex. There's more they don't know than they do know about buying and selling a home. And last, but every bit as important, is consumers understand that if they make a mistake buying or selling a home, it could be very, very harmful to their finances, to their families, to their own well-being. When they go to buy and sell, 9 out of 10, I'm going to use an agent. Now, what do customers value about agents? Let me just touch on that briefly, then we'll move on. In our studies over the years, the number one thing that they value consumers for is negotiating the right price, whether I'm selling or buying. That hasn't changed in 17 years. Consumers said the second most valuable thing agents do is provide me with a list of homes that are like the home I'm trying to sell, or provide me a list of properties that fit my needs. Well, they said that they really like agents doing some of that sifting for them.
So as Steve said, and as I mentioned earlier, everybody thinks, oh, the property search is easy. Actually, this is the key part of what you do, conducting market research, searching the MLS for current offerings. But here's the part buyers don't get. You have personal contacts. You have homes that might be coming to the market. You have things that haven't hit the market yet, things that were listed in your company that aren't available to the public. Your ability to connect with co-op agents and other companies, say, hey, I've got a buyer looking for this. Do you have anything like that? Please sell this point to your buyers, because they can point and click. They might be able to get all the stuff on the internet sites, but they miss everything else. And as Steve said, your ability to sift through them. And by the way, you're going to go out and work expireds and for sale by owners. Good source of listings, obviously, is to go back to expireds, 30 days, 60, a year, maybe 2 years. And find somebody that wanted to move but gave up, and that becomes a source to your buyer. Your buyers aren't going to be able to find that. Do you hear what I'm saying? They can find some of the homes, but they can't find all of the homes. Next, showing the property. It's a lot easier to work with an agent because you can schedule 3 or 4 showings together. You can do all the information. You can point out benefits and drawbacks, and you can answer their questions. Establishing a value and offer price. This is critical. Buyers walk in, if they're not represented, well, they don't know what it's worth. They can guess. They might just say whatever they're asking, we're going to offer less. But you can prepare the CMA with current market data. You can itemize recent sales, and then you can help them determine a fair price to offer. This is huge value that you bring to buyers. And then negotiating the purchase. Again, I know this falls into reading a PowerPoint slide to you, but structuring the purchase, drafting it, reviewing the essentials, interacting with the listing. By the way, let's stop here. Your ability to interact with the listing agent is important. And if you're putting together a multiple offer and you want to help your buyers get it, you can call the listing agent and say, listing agent, without violating the confidentiality of your seller, is there anything that you could tell me that we should put in the contract that would make it more acceptable to your sellers? That's what I was teaching in the multiple offer days. Then you can determine, what's going to be an acceptable multiple offer. That is in the interest of both your buyers and sellers. Then you present the agreement, and then you manage counters to gain agreement. This is when I look at this, I'm thinking, this is a lot of stuff you do. Sell it to your buyers. When they see all this, they go, okay, I'm going to pay a double. And then coordinate all the required services. You know, the inspectors and appraisals and all the stuff that goes on. You do all of that. And then managing the process from, multiple connected transactions, paperwork, negotiating, lenders, lawyers, all of this stuff. Use this outline for your own presentation. And then finally, you arrange for the closing and possession. You arrange for the final walkthrough. You assist with documentation. You coordinate the closing date for all parties, and then you manage the possession. And by the way, another benefit you offer is the post-sale support. After they move in, you help with the move-in assistance. Maybe it's movers or storage or whatever. Dealing with problems after the closing, that happens. Giving them access to documents now or in the years ahead. Answering home ownership questions. Everything you do to make sure that these buyers remain clients for life. So in summary, now is the time to develop your buyer presentation to present all the benefits of working with you and paying your fee. And having done that, then you've got to reach agreement through a buyer broker or buyer agent agreement. And in the next video, we're going to examine the essentials of this agreement.
How many of you guys have taken the ABR? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, please do so. What it is that you need all the skills that you need to lobby for yourself, okay? And all the services that you provide and all the value that you add. Become an ABR. Get your certification. Okay, you have to know that agreement backwards and forwards. Now, it's probably going to revise, but it's okay. What's being presented is still, I represent you. I don't work for the seller. Okay, I work for you, and this is everything that I do. Okay, and of course, not stating things that are going to get us in trouble that could fall into deceptive trade practices and such. Does anybody have a question or anything? Believe it or not, you guys have access to this online university. It's all there. It's all there. Yeah, if you'll send Clinton an email real quick, he'll give you access and stuff. So the final video is just like 7 minutes, right?
15.
Okay, put it on so that way we can finish it. It's 12:48.
Welcome to NAR's First Tuesday, number 159, Part 5, Commission Lawsuits, Buyer Broker Agreement. This is the last in our 5-part series. Buyer brokerage agreements are not required in all states, but given this post-lawsuit environment, I think they're a really good practice. They clearly establish your relationship with the buyers, they define how you will be paid, and they increase loyalty to you. So let's begin by talking about a non-represented buyer as they approach a listing. This is something you should know. Obviously, it's common for buyers to approach the listing agent directly. They come to you for a variety of reasons, but you need to disclose to them, I represent the seller, and you have the right to representation. Now, they may choose to get their own agent, or they may ask you to handle their side of the transaction. But in this case, you cannot represent both parties. Now, depending on state rules, you may have the option of being a facilitator or a transaction coordinator, but you can only be an advocate for one party. Dual agency is an oxymoron. You cannot represent the interests of two competing parties. And if anybody wants to argue that point, go ahead and give me a call. Here's what Marcy has to say about unrepresented buyers.
The question regarding unrepresented buyer always makes me chuckle, because until we got buyer brokerage in the mid-90s, all the buyers who came through our listings were unrepresented buyers. We all represented the seller. And truthfully, all the sellers thought we represented the buyer, and all the buyers thought we represented them. Everybody thought they had representation, right? So now I believe what we've accomplished is that the buyers know whether they're represented or not. And so you have buyers that come through open houses, they are unrepresented. You have buyers who call on a listing and want to see it with a listing agent. They're unrepresented. They know what they're going to do. They want the information. And the listing brokerage always knows what they can do. They have to disclose who they are and who they represent. And if it's not that buyer, they disclose it to them. And the buyer can keep asking the questions. It's not a big deal. Lots of unrepresented buyers come through our doors every day.
So now it's time to sell the benefit of representation to your buyers. And the way to do that is define two different terms, customer versus client. For years, agents didn't get that. A customer means that you represent the seller. So in this case, here's the buyer. They come to the seller. You are the listing agent. So this, you represent them. They are a customer. They are not a client. So you can't advocate for them. You can help them. You can provide information, but you cannot be their advocate. And as you tell that to a buyer, they say, look, I can't share any information about the seller. I can't give you information on pricing. I really can't do much for you. It kind of goes back to buyer beware. They have no representation. And when they hear the drawbacks of being a customer, they may not want to do it. And then you say, it's far better that you be a client. And the definition of client is that I represent you, the buyer. I am loyal to you. Anything you say is going to be confidential. I can't share it with anybody. And I can advise you and I can be your advocate. So, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, what would you prefer to be, a customer or a client? And I don't know if anybody would want to be just a customer. If you work exclusively with one real estate agent, he or she will be working with your best interests in mind and make a much stronger commitment to finding you a home. The way to achieve this commitment contractually is through a buyer representation agreement, otherwise known as buyer agency or buyer brokerage. Buyer agency creates a relationship between the buyer and his or her real estate agent. The agent then becomes your advocate, where confidentiality, loyalty, and care are required. Loyalty to each other is important to optimize the benefits of this arrangement. It is important to note that the laws governing agency vary by state and policies vary by company. Some states also have rules governing dual agency situations. Ask your agent to address this with you. Now we go through explaining the rights and responsibilities in an agreement. And again, I know I'm kind of reading PowerPoint to you, but you can go to the outline and follow this list. And you explain to them, I'm going to understand your needs, establish the contractual relationship, financing, locating, sharing all the relevant information, assisting in establishing value, which is a big one, negotiating the purchase, and finally, managing the process and arranging the closure. The buyer rights and responsibilities, they need to work exclusively with you. They need to provide accurate and complete information, their needs, budget, financial information, requirements, etc. They need to attend scheduled property viewings and inspections. They've got to disclose to you information that would affect the purchase or financing, adhere to the terms and conditions of the agreement, and pay the agreed upon commission. So each side has rights and responsibilities. The next critical term in a buyer broker or buyer agent agreement is whether it is exclusive or non-exclusive. In the exclusive agreement, the commission is due and payable even if the buyer acquires real property on their own or without your assistance. Now, the benefit of this is you're going to work for them because you know you're going to get paid. And it kind of dissuades them from going around looking at other property because they're going to pay a commission anyway, so they might as well work with you. It increases loyalty. In the non-exclusive agreement, the commission is due and payable only basically if you find and are the procuring cost of the property. And in this case, the question I would ask is, how hard are you going to work if you know you're not going to get paid or only on the one you show them? So you decide what you'd like to do, sell both concepts to the buyer, and then move on. Next, period of the agreement, when it starts, when it ends, condition of termination, because the buyer can say, how do I get out of this if I'm not happy? That's up to you. And perhaps if you're doing a retainer, is there money due for an early termination? And as it relates to buyer agent compensation, disclose to a buyer how you are being compensated. Communicate your required commission schedule and then give them options for payment. Mr. Buyer, you could pay me directly and here's what I charge. It's a flat fee or percentage or whatever you charge. Number two, you could have it paid from the commission charged by the listing broker. And then the buyers might say, well, how many times does that happen? And you've got to give them the answer in your market. Here's what Marcy Rogo says about some critical buyer broker language.
In consideration for the services provided by the broker, the buyer agrees that the broker may be compensated in any of the following ways. Check all that apply. So in talking about buyer brokerage agreements, it all depends upon how they're written and how they're going to be received.
Now we've got to address the issue. What if the seller does not offer buyer agent compensation. In the last section, we talked about the skills of encouraging all your sellers to offer it. But in the cases where they don't offer it, what do you do? So, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, let's go through the options. Number one is, this is my commission, and you agree to pay it in full however you choose to do that. Number two, you've got to agree whether to have homes shown in the absence of compensation. This is a real dangerous one. If the buyer said, well, I don't want to see anything where they're not offering compensation, I want to get that in writing, because I don't want anybody accusing me of avoiding a property because they didn't pay a buyer agent commission. Number three, you could request a seller concession as a term of the purchase agreement. You've got to be very careful in the wording. The seller isn't paying the buyer agent commission. They are paying their broker, and then they can pass it on to you. And if there is no buyer agent commission offered, the buyer pays it according to step one, but they could request a seller concession. You know, you buy a home, you could ask for the car in the garage, you could say, give me 10 grand closing costs. You can ask for anything you want in a purchase agreement, and you can ask for the amount equal to your share of the commission. So seller concessions are okay, it happens all the time, it's legal. You just can't have them write a check for the commission. And number four is to agree how to handle the difference between the seller compensation and the fee you charge. Marcy has an answer to that.
In the buyer brokerage agreement I was referring to a little bit ago, it says if the property is subject to the listing agreement with a cooperating broker through the MLS or otherwise, the fee will be the amount equal to the cooperating broker's payout as listed in the MLS, or a minimum fee of. Buyers agree to pay the broker the difference between the amount received from the listing broker and then their stated minimums. So that's how you handle it if there isn't enough there. Now, if the amount that the buyer rep agreement says they can collect is X, that's what they're willing to pay. The amount that's being offered through the cooperating broker is more. Just remember the days when we had bonuses, right? So in the agreements, that in your buyer rep agreements, you're going to have in there what happens if, for example, there's a bonus or if there's extra commission. And you can put in that the broker gets to keep that commission, or as we did in the bonuses, that bonus gets paid back to the buyer. It's however the two parties agree.
So as Marcy said, it's how the two parties agree. Here is a great way to explain compensation to yourself. We have a video called 8 Steps to Buying a Home. It started life on a DVD, and now it's online at realestateconsumervideos.com. It is a video that you subscribe to with us. You send it, you email it, or text it to your buyers, and I will teach the importance of working with you, being loyal, etc. And I explain the buyer agent commission. And this video was done recently enough to know that these lawsuits were coming up, so we have a great explanation. I'm going to show you a clip of that. If you like the video, subscribe to it. Here it is. Another discussion to have with your agent is the payment of commission. Agents are compensated for the services they perform for sellers and buyers. There is a seller commission paid to the listing broker and a buyer commission paid to the buyer's broker. Historically, both commissions were included in the sale price. New legislation requires that agents disclose the amount of each side of the commission. Your agent may require you to pay the buyer's side of the commission. It is also possible to have it added to the sale price, itemized, and deducted from the proceeds of sales. I hope you found that video helpful. It's a great way to have an objective third party educate your buyers. Another thing that you could do in a buyer agreement, Marcy referred to that at some point, and that is to have a menu of fees. Instead of charging one rate for everything, well, you could say, hey, I'll charge you this much to search and find a home to show. And this is what I charge. I'll charge you this much to just show you the home. Okay, you want me to do the contract? I'll do this. If you want me to manage the entire transaction, we can do that. Or if you want, pay me a percentage, a flat fee to do everything. And you know what? I think when people try to have a menu of fees and try to unbundle it, I think buyers are going to say, oh gosh, no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. Oh, you do this. I was working with literally some sheetrockers in my condo fixing water damage. And they're going to do the sheetrock, and then they say, well, it has to be painted too. And there was a little tiny part of me that I thought, well, I can paint. I did that in college. And they said, would you like us to paint it too? And I said, yeah, I want it all done. So I think that's a great way to do it. But a menu of fees is certainly an option. Next, we can talk about retainers. I think that people do better when they have some skin in the game. And one of the things you could do is charge an upfront cash retainer of whatever amount. I'm going to say an amount because that violates everything the lawsuits are about. But you could say, just like lawyers, I'm going to charge a retainer of this much money. So you write me a check, it goes, probably put it into an escrow account. And then here are the terms when it comes out. And then define, is it refundable or not? Maybe it's applied to the buyer agent commission after they purchase a home. Frankly, given all the difficulty and all the time and effort that you put into working with buyers, I think you should charge a retainer. That's one way to buy loyalty. Great idea. Next. Do you show homes without an offer of compensation? I talked about that a little bit before, but Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, would you like to see homes where the sellers are not offering compensation? Yes or no? And I want that in writing. So if I don't show a home because it didn't offer compensation, I want the world to know that was the buyer's decision, not mine. Because if it's your decision, the agent, it goes back to violating the lawsuit. So we've got to be careful. This is really a sensitive point. Next, obviously, you want to talk about fair housing, take them through all of that. I know all of you have the statements on fair housing that are part of what you do, so that might be the last thing that you talk about. So in summary, you have an understanding of the lawsuits. You are still free to charge for your services, but you must provide a clear description of your fees and the options available to your clients. But negotiability, as important as it is, does not deprive you of the right to payment based on your own fee schedule. So all the information that you've gained in these 5 videos, use this as a competitive advantage to attract clients and close more transactions. Thank you so much for watching these videos.
Where's the commission included in, guys? It's in the price. Okay, commissions included in the price. Okay. Conversely, they're still working on stuff, but for an apples to apples comparison, if there's going to be a seller that doesn't offer compensation, what will happen is that the appraiser will have to adjust, because let's say there's 5 homes, 3 of them paid compensation, 2 didn't. There's going to be an adjustment on the compensation because it's not an apples to apples comparison. Closing costs, title, survey, home service plan, and then all of a sudden commission wasn't paid. So therefore there will be an adjustment downward because it wasn't paid. Okay, so the compensation is included in the price. Okay.
On the adjustment in the appraisal form?
Yes, sir.
Not now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, because right now our common practice is, to pay both agents, right? So it's included in the price. Okay. So does anybody have any questions?
I like that one line where you ask the buyer, will do you want to show homes with or without compensation? Well, can they put that in the buyer's agreement?
Well, what it is, they're working on it because the state of Texas is the leader on buyer's agency because we allow intermediary. Okay, so if you guys can do business in the state of Texas, you can work anywhere. Okay, however, they're changing that because they're gonna want to make sure that there's no confusion. All right, because it's just a simple question. Mr. Buyer, would you want me to show you homes where compensation is not being offered? And if it's not being offered and there's 10 homes in Chavano Woods or whatever, and you're seeing only 7 of them and not 10 of them, it's because those 3 weren't offering compensation, right? Okay.
I think you gotta show it. Yeah, you're gonna have to show it.
I think it'll come up as like they know that the house, you might see a sign and they'll be like, hey, how about that house? It already happens with like the criteria that they're searching for. And we're searching for a home. We're like, oh well, I didn't show you that one because it's out of your price range for one, or it might not have that open concept that you wanted. So we're not showing it to them, but they saw the sign and they're questioning why we didn't send it to them. Right? So that's going to be the same thing when it comes to, well, you said you didn't want me to show homes that weren't paying compensation.
Your
We would show on our home when they were doing 1%.
Mhm.
So it was a
Yes.
different, it was a different market though.
Yes.
It was a different situation.
Different market, but believe it or not, we had a lot of folks that wrote up a buyer's agent agreement for 3%, some even 4 plus 395. And we would send that rep agreement to title and require the buyer pay for it because that was discussed already. Yes, sir. There's a lot of folks that charge 4% plus 395 in this office. A lot of folks that do commercial as well as farm and ranch. Okay. So once again, that somebody took 1% and didn't try to collect 2 or 3. I think it was a lack of requiring that buyer's orientation where you guys were stating, hey, Lennar is only going to cover 1, but our agreement states, because I showed you 50 homes, right? In the existing market, you canceled a couple of them. We ended up in the new home market, but I've done all of this work for you. So therefore you will pay me. So once again, guys, become an ABR, charge your worth. I mean, it's a lot of work in 100-degree weather. Do you really want to be earning 1%?
Not really, if I
Okay.
understood correctly. So from now on, the compensation, it's not gonna be disclosed in MLS?
It is not.
Okay, so let's say.
Well, I'm gonna double back. What's gonna end up happening is that there is a board challenging that because they think that it's silly. It needs to be disclosed because what's going to happen is that now it's going to be disclosed on our company website. Okay, that's the reason it's very important, guys. You cannot get other agents from different offices doing your open houses because they cannot disclose what that compensation is. Okay. Okay, so be very careful.
What I was trying to get to is basically, let's say you talk to your buyers, right? And they agree to pay you 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say just 1%, right? And then you show a property that's, or you might show a property that's offering 1%, right? And you call the agent, the listing agent, and negotiate between you, buyer's agent, or representing buyer, and then the seller's agent to increase that commission.
What it is this is you can have a discussion about the compensation. What you cannot do is go, okay, I'm not showing your house. You're like, you can try. What it is that before all of this, you needed to have an agreement, a client relationship in place, which it established your compensation. If the buyer was your client and they knew upfront that you were charging 3.5%, right? Because who knows, they might have started, broke ground right on a new home, and that was going to be 6 months worth of work, right? And upfront, you said that you were going to charge 3.5%. They're only paying 1%. You couldn't negotiate the compensation without your employment contract, because that's what it is, guys. It's your employment contract. I'm an attorney. You're going to get a divorce and you married this jerk and he's got a lot of money and he's got a lot of properties. I'm not going to charge you 10,000. I'm going to charge you 25, right? Because now I'm needing to find 401k, right? And over here as well, what are you going to do for that money, really? I mean, you don't know if you're going to close in 30 days or take 6 months, right? So you need to have that discussion up front, because conversely, she mentioned something about if there was a bonus being paid. And right now there's a lot of bonus money out there, guys. You're going to have to, I'm not sure how they're going to do it, okay? But any overage will probably need to go to the buyer or be left on the table. So if D.R. Horton is offering 7%, and you know that you're going to take them to D.R. Horton, discuss that with your client, because they will need to sign a new agreement or amended reflecting that your compensation will be 7%. Because if 3 months ago you signed it and it said 3%, well, then there's an overage of 4% that needs to be rebated back to them or be left at title.
And there's no way to just the agreement that
what it is,
minimum compensation is 3%. Minimum compensation is 3%. if the listing agent is offering 1%, you have to pay 2. But if they're offering 5%, you don't have to pay me anything.
I'm really hoping that that's the way that it's done. A minimum of 1,500 and let's say a maximum of 15,000 would be ideal. Okay, ideal. Yes, right, right. Or percentages, 1 and as low as 1 and as high as 7.
And also,
Okay.
like, check plus bonuses,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, because
I can guarantee you that the state of Texas is going to make it easy for us to be able to collect compensation that's above the 3%, is what I'm thinking. Okay, because there's many times where you might do both sides, right? Because they do allow it, right? And then they've got to know our market. You know, we have one of the hottest markets going on, and builders want our qualified buyers. So what they're doing is they're paying crazy commissions right now, which is going to continue through summer. Okay.
For the all listings that we have to talk about with the owners, that the rules are changing or not?
What it is that it wouldn't be a bad idea, because at the end of the day, if you're not under contract right now, and you're needing to do a price reduction and stuff, because when you call me and say, Rudy, my house hasn't sold, it's been on the market 30, 60, 90 days, the first thing I will always tell you, do an updated CMA every week, because the market's declining, guys. You know, we're seeing it across the board. Okay. Updated CMA weekly, and then advise your client, hey, we need to do 3 things. Let's lower the price. Let's offer concessions for buy downs and all that. And always offer a bonus to whoever's bringing that buyer to. Okay, because unfortunately,
I've got to leave. I'm sorry.
yes. We'll see you soon. So what ends up happening, we have a lot of agents, even from 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, that if the compensation is 2.5, they don't show the property. They're not going to tell you. You know, they're not. They're just not going to show up with their client. All of a sudden, they're at DR Horton or Meritage or whatever, because they know that they can get 7% commission plus title plus survey plus home warranty. They'll take care of all closing costs. There's no need to have that discussion. But you guys can change that, right? Offer more compensation. Okay, because not everybody's going to be a candidate to live off of 211 or in Bernie or whatever. There's a lot of folks that just want to live, you know, downtown or whatever.
do you think they're gonna adjust the contract to reflect kind of like what was said about, you know, the seller is paying the broker and the broker is the one paying the buyer's agent? Like, do you think they might revise it to work that way?
You know, I don't know. But at the end of the day, what ends up happening is that it has to do with your explanation to the client. Because if you know starting in that the compensation is built into the price, you're laying the groundwork, right? So I'm really hoping that they don't make it complicated, because there's going to be a lot of folks, you know, that won't be able to explain that, and they're going to get confused, and then the buyer's going to get confused and probably decide not to purchase or work with that person, right? So many of the folks, that's the reason, guys, you need to go get your ABR. I can't emphasize it enough, because what's going to happen is that we're seeing it now. There's a lot of folks leaving already and getting regular jobs and such, because they're thinking, well, I mean, I'm barely making it, and now if a buyer has to pay me, that's not going to happen. They've convinced themselves that they're gone, right? Which is not a bad thing either, guys. It isn't. It isn't. Yeah. We had 9,000 realtors back in 2006 and 7. We went down to 2,800.
What?
$2,800. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yep. 7 and 8 and 9. Yeah, we had.
And I remember, I felt like I should, and I remember seeing a little over 4,000 people.
Okay. License.
Right now, how much is that?
Yeah, we dropped to 2,800 at the worst of times, where they were laying people off and all of those, and as many as 9,000. So yes, Alrighty, guys. Any other questions? Because I know that the meeting ran long, but it was a real good training, right? I mean, you guys need to know. You guys need to know.
I went to the meeting at Seymour, and the attorney that was there made it very clear about how in order for us to even show a home, we are gonna need a buyer agreement.
You do.
And according to this, I was like, not. Really
Well, what it is that he's a state. Yeah, he does trainings everywhere, you know. But in Texas, we do.
So that's the part
We
that
do.
I'm most concerned about. Like, how do we have that meeting? Because like, and this is something I asked there.
Okay.
But like, if I met someone at an open house, I would have like listings that were in the surrounding area, and I'd be like, hey, I'm done at 4 o'clock for my open house. If you're interested, I can show you a house. And I was trying to build that rapport right away. So obviously I didn't have a rep agreement, right?
Okay.
But now I can't show a house. Like how are we gonna?
How it's going to be enforced, I don't know. But what your job is going to do is, are you working with an agent already? No, I am not. Okay. Well, I get off in an hour. I can show you 4 homes, but I do need you to sign this paperwork because I'm going to represent you as a client. I'm a master negotiator. You know, I do all these million things for you. I need you to sign this paperwork, and then I can meet you in 1 hour, and we'll showcase 4 or 5 homes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. And if you're not happy with my services after our journey of 2-3 hours, you're more than welcome to terminate. But I do need you to sign this required paperwork. Keep it short and simple. Don't make it too complicated. Okay. But you need to be in compliance, but then don't freak them out either.
Right, that's my
Okay.
thing. I'm like, how do you just like jump from meeting them to like here?
Well, it's required.
I was just gonna say, with that being said, I mean, of course, even you know somebody, your cousin or whatever, just obviously meet somebody in an open house and they don't feel confident with you or don't have the trust yet, so you could just do a 1-day agreement. You know, the 1 day after that, and then they call you the next day saying, hey, you know what, I really like this house. Okay, now let's extend our agreement to 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. If it's a 1-day agreement, you'd be like, you know, you wake up tomorrow, this is gone.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Yes. Good advice. Secure the client, guys. Once again, it's about you and your presence and how you talk and how you showcase a home. You know, if you're knowledgeable, you know, secure the client because they might be working with somebody, right? But they might not have an agreement in place. Okay. In the future, it's not going to be in compliance. So secure the client. I mean, I don't know. I mean, say enough to win them over and still be in compliance for the possibility of you being compensated.
Right. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. You have to build up that trust. You know,
Yes.
they're like, well, what am I saying? I just bet you. You know, I'm just, you know, like.
It's just a requirement. It's just minor paperwork, but it's just for today. There's no long-term commitment, and you and I can decide if we're going to work together and such. It's, you know, don't worry about it, but I'll see you in 2 hours. Okay, and make sure you bring your husband if he's a decision maker or whatever, right?
Do you have any idea when the trade is gonna have the new buyers?
It should happen before July 1st. It should happen. I just, you know, I keep on checking for it, but no, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. Okay, guys. So in closing, we have these resources, guys. Watch these videos over and over again. There's checklists, there's scripts, there's a lot of videos about a lot of things. Pricing your home to list, right? And 8 things to know when you're a buyer, right? So be better than most other folks, because what it is that a lot of folks are giving up, which, like I said, isn't a bad thing, right? Because for whatever the reason, they decided not to take the time to learn anything, and that's not good anywhere, right? So go away. I'll be honest with you, I'm so ready for all these HGTV realtors to go away. You know, it sounds bad, it sounds horrible, But man, the contracts that come over are horribly written. They don't pick up the phone. They don't respond to emails, to texts. They don't show up to closings. They make us look bad, all of us. So once again, if they feel they need to do something else, it's okay. It's okay, right? It is.
So
Okay.
next week, is it the same thing or something different?
It's the same thing. Yeah, what it is that I was gonna break it up, but I mean we're right at an hour and 20 minutes, which is not bad. So no. But if you want to come see it again, you're more than welcome. All righty, guys, that's it. Okay. Yes. All righty.
Different conversation.
All right. Yes, absolutely.